I'm going to apologize right now. I know I was emotional as I wrote this, so I'm fairly confident I'm going to be emotional as I speak it. When Cheryl asked if I would speak to you today, I wasn't sure what I'd say. But if we're truly going to tackle drug addiction and mental health as issues in our community, then I thought I would best serve you all by enduring some discomfort and give you my perspective based on my life's experience thus far. At 9:05 p.m. last Thursday, August 26, I sat at my kitchen table and had a drink to honor my father. It was 45 years to the moment that he left this earthly world. He was 56, I was 11. As I stand before you this evening, I have officially outlived my father. A couple things I remember about Dad. We had a store on 7th Avenue. It's where the LRT is in Calgary today, but back then it was called Skid Row. And it's called Skid Row because that's where all the guys that were down on their luck kind of hung out. And Dad had a soft spot for them. He's constantly helping them out, constantly making sure they had food. He made arrangements with the church across the street that they could crash in the basement. There were no such thing as homeless shelters back then or food banks. The other thing I remember about my father is I would get up in the middle of the night. And it wouldn't matter what time. It could be 1 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. He'd be sitting at the kitchen table. Sometimes he acknowledged me, sometimes he didn't. And it's almost like he was sleeping with his eyes open. He'd be gazing out, kind of just zoned right out. So I want to fast forward to when I'm 26 years old. I finally meet my dream girl and my mother informs me, because back then I was young, I worked hard, I partied harder, and my mom takes me aside and she says, look, if you're serious about this girl, you're going to have to slow down on all this partying. It's not conducive to a good relationship. It's then that she informs me that, well, she was pregnant with myself. She forced my father to choose between the bottle and a family. And it all made sense. See, my father was strong enough to forego the bottle for the family. But he was a World War II vet. And so that meant a lot of the horrors he'd seen and experienced in that, that's what he was going over in his mind every night. That's why he sat at that kitchen table and couldn't sleep. That's also why he had such a soft spot for all the guys down on their luck on Skid Row, because many of them were the same. We as a whole looked down on them. Those were the bums. Those were the crazy people. Those were the drunkards. That was the stigma back then. At age 28, my wife had just gifted me with our firstborn. I remember attending my high school's 10-year grad reunion. I remember them highlighting 6 people that couldn't be with us that evening. They couldn't be there because they no longer walk this earth among us. Out of the 6, 2 names still stick with me today. Not because the other 4 were lesser people, but because of how these 2 left us. I'm not going to give last names, but the first one was Marty. Word was he got so high that he neglected to take his insulin, and he was found dead, alone, on his couch. The other was Russell. This one kind of shocked me because Russell's one of those guys that had everything. He had the finest clothes. He had the nicest car. He had the latest gadgets. From the outside looking in, this guy had everything. And yet, when I thought back, we treated him differently. We weren't nice to him. I felt guilt. I felt guilt for not including him. I felt guilt for ridiculing him. I shared guilt with many others who wonder to this day, if we had just been a little more understanding, would he have made a different choice the day he died? I've endured the guilt of a number of Russells over the years, but it's been this past 5 or 6 years that have really hit me as to the pain that truly exists. From family and friends to the loss of a former city councillor, friend and mentor, Murray Buchanan, to as recently as this past year, to the point that I believe we have a secondary pandemic that no one's talking about.
Yeah.
My nephew, Travis James, in April of last year, decided he no longer wanted to live. With so many animals to feed and no income coming in, he was stressed. He was also still enduring the loss of his brother years earlier and the very recent death of his mother. Thankfully, he was found in time, and he's now been connected with the Thumbs Up Foundation here in Airdrie and receives regular counseling when needed. And I'm proud to say that he now has appreciation for life again. And in fact, if you want to see him in action, he'll be at this weekend's rodeo in Airdrie, fighting bulls, protecting the lives of all the other bull fighters.
Support the stash.
Exactly. That's my nephew.
Yes, support the stash.
I'm glad he's known. That was a victory, but we also had a loss that hit home in 2020. My son and a few of his buddies had this band throughout high school for a few years after. Our house was the house that all the kids hung out at. And one of his bandmates remains his best friend till this day. And his little brother Jacob spent a lot of time at our house. He looked up to his older brother, kind of enjoyed being included in the mix with the older kids, the older teens. He was at every show, every concert, and it was not uncommon for me to come home and find this young lad playing video games in my basement. I personally didn't see it. I never even knew he was struggling with addictions. His family did. Eventually I knew. His brother told my son, he didn't inform me. But Jacob wasn't coming around as often, so it's not like I could do a whole lot about it. The day my son was born, my number one fear changed forever and still remains my number one fear. The fear is that I might outlive one of my children. When I think of what Cheryl and her family are going through, it breaks me my heart. She is living my worst fear. I keep my phone on 24 hours a day. My children are grown, they're adults, they're raising families of their own. And yet I keep my phone on 24 hours a day so that should one of my children need anything, even if it's just to talk, I'm available. I just want you all to understand what it has taken me 50 years to understand. that is what we do indeed, that we do indeed have a pandemic on our hands. There are not enough professionals to deal with it. To turn a young man away when he asks for help is unforgivable. To shrug off someone's addiction without recognizing the pain that causes them to seek refuge from that pain through the drugs, the alcohol, or the ultimate decision to leave this world by their own hand is unforgivable. We educate our children, ourselves, and each other on the dangers of drug abuse and addictions. What we are not doing is paying enough attention to the true cause of people choosing those dangerous drugs, regardless of that education. We aren't dealing with their pain, their lack of feeling needed or included, worthy or productive. Lack of self-worth is dangerous. We tell them all that they can succeed at anything they want to accomplish at, yet we fail to give them the tools to deal with any form of failure. We can choose to remain ignorant and further the negative stigma attached to addictions and overdose. Or we can recognize that if we do not change our view on addictions and recognize them as the true illnesses that they are, then we will all eventually face a loss so great that we ourselves will be compromised. I want to qualify a few points before I finish off here. Not all overdoses are suicides. Most are accidental. Not all addictions originate with mental illness. And I want to give an example of that. When my daughter was in grade 9, she had her tonsils removed. She was given prescriptions. She's 14 years old. They gave her prescriptions for Oxycontin as well as Tylenol 3. I think we really need to put some of our medical system under a microscope. There is no reason to be giving a 14-year-old Oxy for tonsils when back in my day, I was given ice cream and aspirin. We need to start calling out some of these pharmaceutical companies and some, not all, of the healthcare professionals that aid them in the distribution of highly addictive narcotics. I'd actually like to see a surcharge put on these pharmaceutical companies, and with the resulting extra monies going to drug addiction and mental wellness programs. 20% of the cost of all narcotics. If I were king of the world, 20%. Right off the top to go to aid people with these illnesses. We also need to take some personal responsibility as a society for the things that we can control. If we've got pharmaceuticals in the house, they need to be where our children can't find them. Maybe your child's fine, but maybe he's got a buddy that's visiting that isn't. For those that have lost loved ones to the disease of addiction or mental unwellness, we grieve with you. For the rest of us, I pray our children outlive us all, so that we ourselves never have to endure such pain. Thank you.